Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, defense counsel, and ladies and gentlemen of this jury. The first thing I want to do is to thank you for your time and your patience, and most importantly, your service to your community. As in all trials, there were some fits and starts with this that were beyond the control of anyone. Please don't take that out on the parties. But I cannot tell you enough how we appreciate your service to this community. When we started this case last week, and we brought you in here Monday and into Tuesday, we were in that voir dire process where we were selecting. I think it became pretty clear that we were looking for jurors that had reason and common sense. And that's because the court is going to instruct you in a few moments, or actually tomorrow, because we're going to come back tomorrow morning. The court is going to instruct you that reasonable doubt is just simply doubt based on reason and common sense. And the court is also going to tell you it's not all doubt, it's not every piece of possible evidence, and that's why I use the example, and I can't remember now which juror I used with the marriage example, and we talked about having all 300 witnesses and all of the photographs and all of the evidence. It's what point did we convince you and collectively your fellow jurors that beyond a reasonable doubt, not all doubt, that this defendant is guilty of the crime charge. And reasonable doubt is just that. It's a doubt based on reason and common sense. So you're going to use the experiences that you use in your own daily lives, at work, at home, dealing with your family, dealing with your coworkers. And you're going to use the same tools that you use in your daily lives. And basically the court's going to tell you, would you rely on it in the most important of your affairs? And one of the reasons I use that example of a house is, I think all of us can agree the most expensive purchase we'll ever make in our lives will be the purchase of a home. So I use those examples about the hurricane and the earthquake and the roof and the location and all that to show you and to use as a silly example, what do you folks consider important and what are really irrelevant things? Would you rely upon these things? So if you recall last Monday and Tuesday, I talked to you as we went through that voir dire process about 5 things. This case is about 5 things and 5 things only the state has to prove. Venue, which is in Trumbull County, purposely, with prior calculation and design, caused the death with a firearm. That's it. That's all we have to prove to you. So let's break down those elements of those crimes, those 5 things that I told you last week, and I'm going to tell you today. How do we prove that? Well, first of all, venue. That's the easiest one we can prove to you. I believe almost every witness testified that all of these events occurred in Trumbull County. You'll recall that on Wednesday and Thursday, when we had the witnesses up here, we had Detective Pete Pizzullo. He testified, he processed the house, took those photographs. He said Trumbull County is where it happened at. Officer Lane, the first officer to arrive, who had to break into the house, which, as an aside, I'll mention, I think she said on her direct examination that she was scared. Carl always left the house open. Well, it's a miracle because when she killed him, the officers had to break into the house. You'll recall Officer Lane having to break into the house because the house was locked. But we'll get to her credibility in a moment. As I mentioned, Detective Lane, Officer Pizzullo, even Brian Martin and Richard Slider, the individuals who sold the gun and filled out the paperwork for the second gun, Mr. Schreckengast, who leased the house to Claudia Hoerig, they all mentioned in their testimony Trumbull County. So venue has been proven beyond any and all possible doubt. You can check that off your list. Purposely. Well, the court is going to tell you that purposely means a specific intention to cause a certain result. Here are the facts for purposely. She shot a loaded .357 handgun at Claudia Hoerig not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, 5 times. Now she claims, oh, I don't know, I forgot, I don't know, I was going to save 2 for me, I don't know. But the truth and the facts are She did it 5 times. You had Detective Pizzullo testify to the 5 bullets. You had the 5 cartridge cases that were empty. All of that, and 3 times she shot into the body of Carl Hoerig. The last one, she was standing over his head and put the muzzle of that gun, according to Dr. Philo, 12 to 18 inches from his head, fired it.
12 to 24.
12 to 24, I'm sorry, I should read. 12 to 24 inches from Carl Hoerig's head and pulled the trigger. Now, how much more purposeful can you get? In her statement, she told Detective Yanucci and Bill Bolden she shot and killed Carl Hoerig. You will not hear in this case any defense of, it was an accident, the gun went off accidentally. Self-defense. She didn't say Carl Hoerig came at her with a knife or he had a gun. There's no claim that she's not guilty by reason of insanity. No psychiatrist or psychologist or forensic person said she's crazy. So you don't have to worry about that. Purposely. The court is also going to instruct you that flight is evidence of guilt. You will never have, and you could be a jury for the next 50 years, some of us may not make it that long, but you could be a juror here for the next 50 years. I promise you, you will never have a flight that was longer than 10 years, 566 weeks, 3,963 days, 96,124 hours, and 5,707,440 minutes. And you can consider that as her guilt.
Objection. Overruled. Closing argument.
Purposely. The defendant purposely shot 5 times at Carl Hoerig. She put 3 of those bullets into his body, including the one in his head. She admitted to doing it. Purposely has been proven beyond any and all possible doubt. Cause the death of Carl Hoerig. The defendant shot 3 bullets into his body of Carl Hoerig. 2 of those shots were fatal. Again, she fled the country for 10 years.
Objection.
Overruled. And the court will instruct you that you, not required to, but you can consider flight as evidence of her guilt. Cause of death. She admitted it to this detective and Bill Bolden. She said, you can listen to that tape for 3 hours. She said at least 3 or 4 times she killed him. She admitted it to me earlier this afternoon. She killed him. Cause of death. Dr. Philo testified based upon Dr. Germanich's examination, because as you're well aware, Dr. Germanich has since unfortunately passed since these events. Dr. Philo testified that gunshots B and C, B was the one that went through and struck the lung and the aorta. C, of course, is the headshot. He testified in the report from the evidence. You'll have the autopsy reports, and you'll have the reports of both Dr. Philo and Dr. Germanich. Gunshot B struck the back, fractured the ribs, lacerated the lung, the right lung, and the aorta. And if you'll recall the testimony of Dr. Philo said, well, that wasn't an instant death. He would have died, and I think he gave a range of a few seconds to maybe even a few minutes based upon evidence, and his heart would have still been pumping. That was his testimony from this witness stand. Gunshot C is, according to Dr. Philo and Dr. Germanich, who of course has passed, and you will have both of their reports, a penetrating and perforating gunshot to the right side of the head, 12 to 24 inches from the head of Major Carl Hoerig. The cause of death of Carl Hoerig has been proven beyond any and all possible doubt. Firearm. Well, you have the firearm here. We have the recovered cartridge casings, 5 from the basement. You have bullets and fragments from Carl Hoerig's body that were recovered from the autopsy and the scene. You have the testimony and report of Andy Chappell. He was the gentleman from BCI that came here and testified. He does the thing where he talks about a football and it goes down the barrel and it leaves engravings and striations on the bullet. You have those projectiles that were recovered from Carl Hoerig's body from the Fire 357. You have the 5 cartridge casings that were found in the basement. Andy Chappell told you all 5 of those cartridge casings were fired from that .357, and you'll have his report as well to show that. The firearm, she purchased it. She admits that. She admitted it again today. She practiced with it. She admitted that. She fired it. She told you that. And again, she fled the country for 10 years, 500...
All right, that's the third time. Let's go on to something else.
Well, it goes to each and every element, I believe.
Let's go to something else.
You can consider flight as evidence of her guilt. Firearm. She admitted to this detective that she used a firearm to Detective Mike Iannucci and U.S. Marshal Bolden. It's in her statement. You heard it the other day when we played that 3-hour statement. She admitted to it. Firearm has been proven to you beyond any and all reasonable doubt. So that gets us to why are we here? What's the one thing we haven't talked about? Prior calculation and design. And credibility. The court's going to tell you to weigh the credibility of the witnesses, including this witness. Who has the most to gain or lose? Well, we heard all the witnesses. Did they have anything to gain or lose? Detective Iannucci? Even the Detective Pizzullo, who was attacked for some things he did in the past? Is his credibility shot because of something that happened 5, 10, 8 years ago? Whose story or version makes no sense? These are the things you're going to have to weigh. So let's talk about some credibility. Now, yesterday, when this defendant was on the witness stand, I heard her say one thing, and within a minute or two, say something completely opposite. First, she told us, and these are just some of the examples, you know all of them. She said, oh, Carl always wanted to eat out at fancy restaurants, and I always had to pay. But 5 minutes earlier, she said, we gave you a list of recipes, very specific, that I was supposed to make. Well, are you eating out, or are you making recipes? She talked about, on her statement and on her testimony, she had to walk around the house naked in high heels. But I thought the 16-year-old son was there. Carl was awful. He was a terrible person. Oh, he did this. He made me feel bad. He was crazy. Made me crazy. Carl's such a bad guy that when she tries to kill herself with some of his guns, what's he do? He takes them away from her. Carl wants a baby. She wants a baby. But then, if you listened carefully yesterday, she was talking about the baby. She referred to the baby as the thing inside her. The thing. And then, this baby that she wants so badly and desperately, when Carl says he doesn't want one, she drinks a half a bottle of that rum. Are those credible, believable things? After killing Carl, she calls her family. In 10 minutes, this plan A, plan B, it's out the window. They convince her, oh, don't kill yourself, Claudia. She's been trying to repeatedly kill herself for years. Did she call him when she wrecked the car 3 weeks earlier? Did she call him when she tried to kill herself with a gun? No, she calls him after she kills Carl Hoerig. And then they tell her, oh, you got to get out of Ohio. It has the death penalty. That's what she wants. She wants to die. Then you hear her testifying repeatedly. I was running out of money. I had no money, no money, no money. But she's got a condo in New York. She testified yesterday she had an apartment in Brazil and another piece of property. She had, by my count, $12,000 right before she did this. She transferred $9,900 to Brazil a few days before she killed him. And then she went to the bank and said, oh, you know what? It wasn't $1,000. It was $3,000. Well, I don't know about you folks, but I don't think I can get $12,000 in the next 3 or 4 days together. Maybe you guys are richer than I am, and she obviously is. Then she worries about the recoil. All we heard about was the recoil. I'm afraid of the recoil. I might not kill myself. I'll just injure myself, and then you won't love me. And the recoil. But she has no problem shooting Carl Hoerig 3 times, including once 12 to 24 inches from his head. Apparently the recoil wasn't that big a deal. Again, what's the credibility? There's no defense here. There's no self-defense, there's no insanity, no alibi, no mistaken identity, no somebody else did it. How was her demeanor on the witness stand? Did you notice? You folks decide her credibility. All the crying yesterday after she told her father said he loved her. How much did she cry after she told you she killed another human being? All right. You're going to get some instructions on some lesser. One is going to be a lesser included offense. The other is an inferior offense, or inferior charge. So a lesser included offense and an inferior offense. You have aggravated murder, which we're going to talk about the prior calculus. Well, your duty as jurors is to first try to agree on aggravated murder. That's your first task and your first duty. Murder is the lesser included offense, and basically it means you find that she didn't have prior calculation and design. It means you found that we didn't prove to you that she planned it. And we'll talk about the planning in a minute. I don't know how you're going to do that, but if you do, objection, murder.
Sustained.
Okay.
Be careful.
The inferior offense is voluntary manslaughter. Now, to believe the inferior offense, so you've got aggravated murder, and now you've got voluntary manslaughter. To believe that and to find that charge, you have to find she didn't plan to kill him. You have to find that it wasn't purposeful. And you have to find that, you really have to just believe her, that Carl Hoerig saying, "Don't get my paintings bloody," as he was leaving her, that's enough to make a reasonable person shoot and kill her. That's what you have to believe to get to that inferior defense. So you have to forget about the pre-planning and the planning. You have to forget about the purposeful. And you have to find that when he says, "Well, go ahead and kill yourself, just don't get my paintings bloody," and walk away, and she shoots at him 5 times, hitting him through twice, and putting one in his head, that was reasonable.
Objection, Judge. Overruled.
Voluntary manslaughter is an even lesser offense of aggravated murder and murder. Basically what it means is Carl Hoerig did something to make her kill him.
Objection. Overruled.
So let's talk about aggravated murder and the last element of aggravated murder. Purposely, in Trumbull County, with prior calculation and design, cause of death with a firearm. We've talked about everything except for prior calculation and design. The court's going to tell you that prior calculation and design is a purpose to cause the death reached by a definite process of reasoning in advance of the murder, including a mental plan, studied consideration of the method and the means and the instrument, the firearm, which would cause the death. Sufficient time and opportunity for the planning and the circumstances surrounding the homicide must show a scheme designed to carry out the calculated decision to cause death. What does the state not have to prove for you? Well, the court is going to tell you the state does not have to prove it's the perfect crime, because if it was a perfect crime, you probably wouldn't have a defendant seated there. We don't have to show that you had a getaway plan. We don't have to show that you had clothes packed. We don't have to show that she disposed of the body. We don't have to show that she wasn't suicidal. Maybe she was. We don't have to, because you can still be suicidal and still kill somebody. Lots of times you hear people that went out and do life experience, you read the paper, somebody went out and killed 3 people and then killed themselves. We don't have to show that she's not suicidal. And in this case, I submit to you that you cannot have a better case of prior calculation and design. So let's look at it. First of all, 7 months before this happened, she told Krista Bridges at the bachelorette party in Cleveland, "If Carl left me, I'd kill him." And that's something that sometimes people say. You might have heard it at a bachelor party or a bachelorette party. You might have heard someone express that. But have you ever seen anybody follow through on it? She did. Days before she murdered Carl Hoerig, she wired $9,900 to Brazil. That's where she remained for those 10 years. 2 days before she shot and killed Carl Hoerig, and while Carl Hoerig was out of town, remember, she bought that .357 handgun. 48 hours before she kills him. 2 days before she shot and killed Carl Hoerig, she paid $227.52 for a laser sight. State's Exhibit 77, right here. $227.52. Now remember her credibility? She has no money. I have no money. You need a laser sight to do this? Using your reason and common sense, does that make any sense, what she said? I asked her on the witness stand, can you put a gun in your mouth? Pull the trigger? Suicide? Really? Guns, including the murder weapon she tried, the pills, the car wreck, carbon monoxide, jump off the buildings. She even said at one point in the interview with Detective Yanucci, something about he had to grab the pen, and she sort of jokingly said, oh, yeah, I'm going to kill myself with that. Well, we waited over 11 years for her to do it, but she hasn't done it once.
Objection. Sustained. Behave yourself.
Suicide? Gun? You target practice to commit suicide? Using your reason and common sense, does that make any sense to you? You need that laser sight to commit suicide? You're worried about recoil? Like I said, put it in your mouth. Suicide? All night Saturday. Doesn't do it. All day Sunday. Doesn't do it. She waits until Carl Hoerig comes home, who's been out of town. She already knows that there's been 2 previous times he's told her, I don't want a child. Her statement that she would keep the child and raise it herself. Does that sound like suicide? Does that sound like someone who's going to kill themselves? She wasn't planning a suicide, she was planning a murder. 2 days before she shot and killed Carl Hoerig, and while Carl was out of town, she bought ammunition. Not only ammunition to use that gun, but you'll remember the empty box of .38 caliber to practice with. Remember Mr. Martin said you could practice with .38, it's not as expensive. And she did. 2 days before she shot and killed Carl Hoerig, she target practiced with that .357 for about an hour. She said it. Mr. Slider said it, who ran the thing, the terrible salesman that tried to get her to buy a .45. 2 days before she shot and killed Carl Hoerig, she tried to buy a second, more powerful handgun. Now, of course, we've heard her excuse for that is, well, he was a pushy salesman, so I filled out all the paperwork, and then I gave him a credit card that wouldn't work. Okay, that's her credibility. What else do we have on prior calculation and design? We heard 3 hours yesterday, 3 hours on the statement that basically badmouthed Carl Hoerig, the victim who will never, ever, ever get to tell us his side of what happened. The victim in this case, who she prohibited and prevented from admitting, denying, or saying something else happened in that house. She didn't leave. She didn't file for divorce. She didn't call her family before she was going to do this. She's got a new boyfriend on Match.com. Remember Bruce? She's got a job. She's got a great job back in New York City. She still has her condo back in New York City. You'll remember words that said she was betrayed when Carl told her about his daughter's baby before he took a shower. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe it was 2 days before prior calculation and design, it certainly was on March 12th. And again, listen to the court's instructions. It doesn't have to be days. It could be within the hour. It could be 30 minutes. You decide, based on the court's instructions and the evidence, how long it was for her prior calculation and design. So now on March 12th, she tells him he's pregnant. The 3rd time, he tells her, I don't want children. And this is all, whether it's true or not, there's no medical evidence of it. I don't have any doctor's reports. You won't have any doctor's reports. You won't have an OBGYN she saw. This is her credibility and what she said. Again, Carl Hoerig can't dispute anything that happened in that house because she killed him. March 12th. She waits for 1 hour while he's in that shower. She goes and gets that gun. Again, it's all according to her. She gets the .357 that she bought 2 days earlier. that she had the laser sight on and practiced for an hour 2 days earlier. He comes out of the bathroom. He's packed and ready to leave her.
Objection. There's no evidence for that.
It's up to the jury to determine what evidence was presented from the witness stand. Go ahead.
Well, he certainly rented an apartment at 670 West Broad Street because you heard Mr. Schreckengoss use his last breath practically coming in here with an oxygen tank saying Carl Hoerig put $100 down on February 23rd. So I submit to you that the evidence clearly shows Carl Hoerig was leaving her. You heard the testimony from Officer Lane and Detective Pizzullo that that vehicle had guns in it and a duffel bag in the back. Maybe she doesn't believe it.
Yeah.
He's already rented the house. You've heard Donald Schreckengoss. You have the state's exhibit. If you hold it up to the light like Mr. Schreckengoss, you'll see the dates. That was his original document that he was kind enough to give us. He shoots at Carl Hoerig 5 times. She pulls that trigger 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It's the same gun she purchased 2 days earlier and practiced with that laser sight. She misses it 2 times, as you're well aware. There were 2 bullets down in the basement. One hit the hot water tank, and the other one was recovered, I think, in some clothing. He's at the bottom of the steps. This part, if you determine it and want to, this part can be your prior calculation and design. She shot at him. Now, she wants to tell you he was instantly dead. Based upon what medical background, I don't know. But then she walks, and you were in that house. You went upstairs, you went downstairs, and you'll have pictures of it. There are 10 steps. She's now fired at him, and the state submits to you that she fired 4 times. The 2 misses, based upon Trooper Jester's diagram and testimony, based upon the physical evidence. She hits him twice, and you'll recall the testimony of Dr. Philo when Mr. Watkins was here. He was crouched down. He was putting his shoes on. One of those bullets travels pretty much across his back. The other one is down and through. He falls, he goes out, she shoots again. As he's laying on the ground, it goes from lower to upper, gets in his nipple. That's 4 shots.
I'm going to object. That's not what the doctor testified to.
It's up to the jury to determine what the testimony was. Proceed.
Now, if you find no other prior calculation and design, you certainly can find that walking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 steps with a gun you just fired 4 times and struck a human being with twice, pointing it at your head and pulling that trigger is sufficient for prior calculation and design. That fatal shot after she walked down those steps and walking those 10 steps, if you decide, and it's your province, it's your determination, is more than enough for prior calculation and design. But she says, well, I killed him the first time. You did. Then using your reason and common sense and recalling the testimony of Dr. Philo, who said he would have survived that shot that went through the aorta, and the other one was a non-fatal shot, we know that. Why do you have to walk down 10 steps and put a bullet in his head at 1 to 2 feet away? Because she wants him dead. She put that gun there, pulled the trigger, you have a stippling. She heard and watched that gun explode and penetrate his head. Then she makes the phone calls. Well, before that, she covers him up like a piece of garbage. She throws
Objection.
Sustained.
I'm going to ask for a mistrial at this point.
Overruled. Proceed.
She covers him up and puts garbage on him. She put a comforter on him, she put the tarp on him, and if you'll notice in one of the exhibits, there's some kind of empty box on him. And she told this detective, and she told, I think she testified the other day, the same thing, to help her get away. She wants to get away. But she makes these phone calls, and they tell her, her relatives tell her, well, suicide's a sin. What about murder? Doesn't anybody in Brazil say, Claudia, murder's a sin too? And then we get into the conversation about the death penalty. She covered the body so she could get away and won't get caught. Not packing anything? Well, let's talk about that. If she packed something, wouldn't Carl come home and say, boy, where are you going? What are you packing up? What are you doing? So that might be a tip-off to Carl. All her clothes are cheap anyway. She said she only pays $5 for J.C. Penney's. So, big deal. She leaves a bunch of $5 clothes in the house. There's only so much you can get on a plane anyway. She then, and this all goes, and the court's going to tell you the circumstances surrounding this case. Then it goes, she drives to the bank and withdraws another $3,000. Now, mind you, of course, I thought she drank a half a bottle of rum, but she didn't go to the bank. And I want you to think about all the people she interacted with. Did they look like something terrifying had happened to her? Was she out of her mind? Bank tellers, they gave her $3,000. She then drives an hour and a half to Pittsburgh International Airport, where she's conscious enough that she says she makes the phone call to use Carl's flight privileges so she can fly for free from Pittsburgh to LaGuardia in New York. She goes and gets on the plane and gets a flight to New York to LaGuardia Airport. Now think about going to the airport. Anybody fly recently? You got to talk to the booking agent. You got to talk to the TSA people. You got people at the gate that tell you when to get on and they talk to you. You got stewardesses. Nobody says, boy, this girl was really crazy. She was drunk. She gets on that plane, rides for an hour and a half. There's other passengers, crew member, they don't notice anything. She's normal. She gets off the plane, and she tries to call her friend who can't take her to the airport. I suspect that's the man she flirts with and has the accounting job lined up with again. She gets off the plane, gets a taxi to go to JFK because JFK will get her to Brazil. She purchases another ticket from JFK Airport, interacts with those people. She goes through another TSA checkpoint. Nothing unusual there. Boards the second flight, goes to Brazil. Again, there's 40 flight crew, other passengers. Doesn't look like anything unusual. She arrives in Brazil. She then took another plane from Sao Paulo to where her family was, and her father. So now she gets there, and within 6 months she's married again. She's living her life for 10 years. Overruled. Prior calculation and design, she admitted to it. Buying the gun, laser sight, practicing with it, trying to buy a bigger gun, and you can put credibility that you want in there. I don't think Mr. Slider was really that great of a salesman. Waiting outside the shower for an hour, shooting and killing Carl Hoerig. All of her hatred of Carl Hoerig came to a planned and thought-out murder instead of divorce. All of those things she told us. There's only two reasons that we heard all those things in the statement to Detective Yanucci and on the witness stand. They either make a difference because it's in her head, and I submit to you that all those terrible things, the open-toed shoes, the pajama party, the white, silky Victoria's Secrets, the pom-poms, the orgies, all of that stuff's in her head. Why else would she tell this detective 10, 11 years later about it? Why would it be so important to get on this witness stand and tell you folks about it? Because it's in her head. She hated Carl Hoerig. Ladies and gentlemen, prior calculation and design has been proved to you beyond any and all reasonable doubt. The facts in this case are very, very straightforward and simple. She's not guilty of an inferior offense of manslaughter. Saying don't kill yourself and get blood on my pictures is no reason to kill anybody. She did murder him. She purposely did it, but she did it with prior calculation and design. This case is overflowing with prior calculation and design. From buying the gun, transferring the money, to all those bad things she thought about and told you about, to practicing with the gun, to walking down those steps after she shot him twice already and putting that gun to his head 12 to 24 inches. Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant is guilty beyond any and all possible doubt of aggravated murder as she stands charged in this indictment and the specification of using a firearm to do it. I'm going to take this last moment to thank you again for your time, your patience, and your service to Trumbull County. And I will leave you with this thought. Each and every one of you speaks for the kind of justice system we have in this country and in this county. You speak for Carl Hoerig.
Objection. Overruled.